All right, gentlemen, welcome back. It's 2024, January, Rugby Scoot Pod. I'm joined by Vuyo. I'm joined by Enda.
Hey.
Gentlemen, thank you for availing yourself for today. And obviously, we're going to wait for Enda and Jade. They'll join in later on in the conversation. But for now, let's check out how everyone has been doing. Hugh, I'll start off with you. I mean, how have things been? How have you entered the 2024 year? And how have you been enjoying the footy over the December period, coming after a very hectic and intense 2023 Rugby World Cup?
Hello. I'm excited to be back. Good to speak to you. I'm been enjoying the footy over the Christmas period. We're seeing all of the derbies and things, all of the local matches. It's great to see how many fans are going to games across all leagues, across all nations. And yes, rugby feels like something to be excited about at the moment.
No, 100%. Vickers Miranda, I understand you are also in South Africa, having left Russia for the December period, for the December holiday, for the December break. How have you been enjoying the rugby? How have you been enjoying the sun, most importantly? And Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year, fellas. It's actually been an enjoyable time off, break. Haven't watched much rugby. I've just been trying to basically switch off so that, because I know when I go back to work, it's going to be full on. Watched a couple of games. Watched a couple of South African derbies. So it has been a nice one. I mean, going into 2024, I mean, there's a little bit of excitement in terms of rugby, what's coming up, and I mean, we know this year obviously will be the first year teams want to prove themselves after the World Cup and building for the 2027 World Cup.
Yeah, 100%. Just to give some information, obviously, to our listeners, today we'll be covering the URC, the ins and outs of the URC, what's making headlines. And then from there, we'll touch on the English Premiership. From English Premiership, we'll move on to top 14 and then to see what we can discuss regarding Super Rugby. I mean, the show will be about all things rugby, everything rugby, movers and shakers of the sport itself. We'll start off with Hugh. Hugh, currently, obviously, there's news making headlines currently today regarding Welsh winger Louis Rees Zammit. He might be going to Japan at the moment. Obviously, looking at those headlines, looking at Welsh footy at this point in time, I mean, what are your thoughts regarding, firstly, let's look at URC competition, Welsh teams. I mean, last year we spoke about all the troubles that have been happening in Welsh rugby. I mean, are those ongoing troubles going into 2024? And then lastly, we can touch on the moving of, or the rumors about Zammit going to Japan.
Well, I'm not sure that things have gotten any worse recently, although we are yet to see how many players are going to have to leave Wales during the summer due to the reduced budgets. It's been a sort of expected start to the season, I would say. For most of the Welsh regions, I would say that my team, sadly, the Scarlets, have probably been the worst team, if we're just open out and saying it, probably performing the most badly. But I think, this season was always going to be about the start of new projects and kind of getting through it and seeing what we can put in place now that can hopefully stand us in good stead in a few years' time. It's not been going perfectly, and I think the results are showing that, and the performances on the pitch are certainly showing that. But I think this is just a time where Welsh fans just need to back their teams and just hunker down and get through it, really, and make sure that we have the right people in the right places by the time we come out of the end of it to hopefully take us forward. In terms of Louis Rees Zammit to Japan, so I've seen that the team that he was linked with was Honda Heat. I would steer clear of those if I was him. They've taken the 60 points in about every game they've played so far this season. I would be surprised if he went to Japan at this stage. often Japan is sort of like where you go at the end of your career. Not in all cases. I know a lot of Boks go there earlier than some, and obviously New Zealand have got the sabbatical rule where you can go there for a year and come back. So I would kind of be surprised if he went there now. He was heavily linked to France a few weeks ago. So I don't know whether this is just his agents kind of saying like, oh, he's had a massive offer from Japan as well, and just trying to stir up a bit more wages, which is what agents' jobs are. So that is completely fine. But yeah, I would be surprised if he went to Japan at this point in his career, but I might be wrong.
Fair enough. Vuyo, I want you also to jump in here, listening to what Hugh has said about the time frame of which players might be considering the move to Japan. I mean, would you, as a coach yourself, I mean, would you recommend midway through your career? I mean, midway, we're looking at late 20s, 27, 28, going to Japan? Or would you say later in your career, as you have suggested, I mean, your back end of your career, you're about to retire, maybe spending 2 or 3 years there, like what we've seen from the New Zealanders, Aaron Smith, Brodie Retallick as well. They've all retired from international footy, so they're going to spend a year or two in Japan at the back end of their careers. What would you suggest? What would be your opinion with this regard?
I think it would be surprising, definitely, if a player would move, especially at the peak, between the ages of 26 and 29, at their basically rugby peak. I think it would be definitely surprising if a player would move to Japan, because I mean, competition isn't top notch, and we all know once you start playing rugby at a lower level, you're bound to lose that intensity of the highest game where it's needed for your internationals. So definitely some other players would get on top of that player if he would go to Japan. For me, I think it always makes sense for the older guys they're about to retire, because of the fact that there's less collisions and less impact on collisions, and also I mean, they can prolong their careers a little bit longer in terms of how they're managed by those clubs, because they'll be paying so much money to those players. So yeah, for me, it wouldn't be a great idea. It wouldn't be a smart idea, but I would definitely, if like Hugh has said, with Louis Zammit going to France, I think that would be great for him, because he is that type of player that plays a little bit loose. He enjoys a little bit of counter attack, which is what French rugby is about, and a bit of offload. So I think Louis Zammit would be his best bet would be obviously moving to France. I think it will definitely kick his career even an extra notch up.
All right, fair enough. Moving on to our next topic, gentlemen. Springbok coach, or ex-Springbok coach, Jacques Nienaber, moved over to Leinster after the World Cup. And obviously Leinster, but from what I've seen, right? What I've analyzed from watching them a few games now, and I think obviously without Johnny Sexton, it's a big impact. And looking at their current state, obviously they've recently lost to Ulster as well, and they're not looking as sharp as they've been previous seasons or previous years. But looking at Jacques Nienaber being introduced as director of rugby within that setup, is it too early to say, maybe to see what Jacques Nienaber can do at Leinster versus what we've seen from who's the current guy who's coaching at Racing again? Lancaster, yes. To see the improvement, what Lancaster has done at Racing, and obviously, is it early to judge a person like Jacques Nienaber currently within that Leinster setup, looking at how they've performed and thinking that, from my perspective, I don't think they're at their peak. Yes, they might be missing maybe a few players in key positions, like Sexton having retired. Hugh, I want you to give me maybe an analysis of what you've made of Leinster so far this season, and can that be also linked to having Jacques Nienaber within their setup?
Well, I think Leinster is still Leinster. I think they're still an excellent team, and the pyramid that they've got underneath them supporting them is arguably world leading. I think it's definitely too early to draw a conclusion about Jacques in there. He's not even had half a season because he didn't come in until game 3 or 4, maybe even beyond that. Watching Leinster, I was a little bit surprised at their Champions Cup games. I know that La Rochelle are obviously the two-time European champions, but when they played them, La Rochelle were in a bit of a dip. So, it was throwing it down with rain, so I'll kind of give that one a pass. But the home game against Sale, I just felt they weren't mentally up for it, whether that's partially because of Johnny Sexton leaving, I think is probably as big an impact as any coach change at Leinster. But I don't think it's worth judging Jacques until probably maybe even next season when he's had a decent amount of time with a pre-season as well to really get his ideas across. When you've got an incredibly settled squad, but then you change someone as significant as Jacques in there, it's always going to take a moment to adjust. It's not exactly been Warren Gatland at the Chiefs. So yeah, I think it's still giving him time to get his feet under the table. I think he's still very much doing okay. I haven't seen anything particularly worrying, I have to say.
Vuyo, you want to jump in there as well?
Yeah. So I'll make two scenarios. Basically, if you look at a team like Leinster, they have a very good culture. It's almost like your Crusaders of Europe. They have a very good culture in terms of building an academy with it, which is going to be obviously giving feeder to the main side. So if you're going to come in, a person like Jacques, who was a defense coach coming into a setup, the first thing is that there already is a culture. So Jacques himself needs to fit into that culture that the team has, and obviously try and impact the setup in small bits by obviously introducing some of the defense strategies that he has based on what they've done before previously. So it is going to be very difficult for him to just come and make a quick impact. So that's why it's easier for. That's why where I agree with you. What you says is that he still needs more time to settle in and also, like I said, fit into the culture of Leinster. If you look at the Lancaster, when Lancaster arrived at racing, you could almost say that there was no culture at all. And the first thing that he did was to put a culture in place. And also, I follow him on LinkedIn. He talks a lot about leadership and leadership styles and the kind of things that he's doing. So for me, that's someone that arrived in an empty cabinet and then he put things into that cabinet. Whereas for Jacques, who got to Leinster, he got there with the full cabinet and he was trying to fit himself into that cabinet. So I don't know if it makes sense, but anyway. So I think for me, Jacques is still a little bit more time, and with Lancaster making the quick, obviously success with racing at the moment, is based on the fact that he arrived there with the was no culture, and he just simply put one or two things into place, and is reaping the rewards at the moment.
Fair enough. Well put. Hugh wants to add as well.
No, I just want to ask Vuyo a question, if that's okay. I just want to hear your strategy. If you were a coach and you're going into a fresh team, how do you go about implementing a culture? Is it about making your values extremely clear and printing them on the wall? Is it about rules and regulations? Obviously Lancaster hasn't had much say in the personalities that Racing have been signing. So I'm just wondering how you implement your culture on other people.
Yeah, so for me, it's different. I don't know how some other people approach it, but for me, I always get to a setup and I wanna almost take a back seat and see what's available and what's been implemented. And then as things go along, the most important thing is for you when you get your setup is to get your leadership group set up as quickly as possible, because then your leadership group is the one that's going to basically be looking after things. And once you start getting the leadership group set up, and then you can start to understand what is going on the ground in terms of the players, and then you can start to implement your culture. You can start to implement your the way that you want to play, the way that your values as a team or as a club. And it's also nice for me. One thing that I've always done is chat to previous coaches, where I've gone into that setup and I chat with previous coaches just to find out what were the challenges and what things that they always wanted and they couldn't get, so that I just have an understanding of of what I'm faced with. I've been fortunate that the coaches that I've spoken to before have never obviously took almost like the arrogant way or being pissed off at the fact that I was taking over. It's always been like, yeah, I'm happy for you. You will make a success. So it's always been like a almost parting knowledge within each other. And I think for me, that's why I say you just get to a setup. You build your leadership group as quickly as possible. You make sure that you are watching everything and you're actually looking at the smallest things, because the smallest things are the one that will hurt your system. And then once you can start to do that, and then your culture will sort of come in quite nice and slowly, and then you'll start to see the difference in how the players are behaving.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Perfectly
That's awesome.
put. Yeah, 100%. Speaking of cultures, speaking of coaching system, speaking of plans being in place, foundations being in place, I want to tap into the current state of two coaches. One very well known, has a lot of accolades behind his belt, or under his belt rather. Jake White, who's currently coaching the Blue Bulls, and we have another one who does mostly unorthodox type of coaching style, unorthodox philosophy, something that's not usual for a lot of people. John Dobson, who's the current Stormers coach, and we have one player in between these two coaches, and we've had multiple players having to leave the Blue Bulls setup and finding other franchises. Mani Libok to be one of them. As soon as Jake White got to Blue Bulls, a few players who've moved on from the Blue Bulls setup and become household names. Mani Libok is the one that comes to mind immediately. But gentlemen, Vuyo, I'll stick with you now, and then maybe Jade can also share some light here, and then Hugh, you may jump on if you have any other questions regarding this particular topic. I mean, looking at the situation with Wandisile Simelane moving from the Lions to Bulls, now he's going to the Stormers. I mean, what do you make of this current situation? Maybe, Vuyo, you can start by, as a player, from having participated or having played at the highest level as well. And then we look at the coaching setup. I mean, what are these intricate situations that make players have to bounce from club to club? Eventually, hopefully, Wandisile Simelane finds a home in Cape Town. But I mean, what do you make of this current saga? And also, I mean, what do you make of the current coaching setup that's happening at the Bulls at the moment?
Yeah, I think if you look at the playing side of things as a player, it's hardly that a coach speaks with the player before he signs the contract, especially with the agents these days. So you always get the agent discussing with the club, with the CEO, whoever is a high performance manager at that union, and then the players get signed. And then although the coach has agreed to sign that player, so he has agreed to sign the player. So the player comes, and then they only start having first interactions once they at the union. So we get to a point where personality clash, or there's just something that they're not clicking. Whereas if we actually, coaches would be speaking to players way before and telling them their plans, it would actually make it easier. And then also, if you remember, the players come into a setup and they don't know what role they need to play in that setup. So if you're gonna get to, if Simelane getting to the Bulls from the Lions, he was playing 13 at the Lions. He got to the Bulls, he plays 13 once or twice, and then he gets moved to fullback. He's probably not happy, because he was probably thinking someone in his family, friends, or whatever told him that Lukanya is going to retire. He's going to be the next 13. So you don't know that. We don't know what kind of mindset he's in. And then if you look at, obviously, the coaching styles are a lot more about culture, basically. If you look at Jake, I've never worked with him, but I've heard that he's quite a strict guy, like teacher type of guy. So he's working with the mentality of the 90s babies, the 80s babies. He worked well with those ones, 70s babies. But had he worked well with the 2000s, because these kids are thinking differently at the moment. And what kind of style is he going to approach with those youngsters? Because I can tell you this: they're very much entitled. They're getting paid the big bucks. They're entitled to start every weekend. And if you are the coach telling them that they're not going to start, then you're already running a risk of losing that player. So that's how obviously Jake would have been his approach because of the way that he runs his teams and culture. It's probably that hardness. And then if you look at Dobson, for example, someone who's like taking it easy, let the things flow, that's different. Maybe that's what the 2000s are liking at the moment. And maybe that's why, if you notice with the Stormers, there are a lot more youngsters are thriving within the team, whereas the older guys, they're just simply just enjoying their backseat and just letting the youngsters do the work. So for me, I think it's all different. It all depends on the way that you approach your culture as a coach.
Right. Jade, I hope Bloemfontein is not too hot. I mean, what do you make of this current situation at the moment?
Afternoon, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, perfect. Well, Scoop, Vuyo summed it up perfectly there. But I also think maybe it could just be that Simelane, maybe Jake's seen this guy as having a chip on his shoulder. And, certain players, although Simelane's been brilliant at the Lions, brilliant at the Cat. At school level and at junior level, coming up now to the senior ranks at the Bulls, where would be his big break. Everybody knows.
Oh, Jade seems to have disappeared there. It was coming along nicely. Hopefully we get Jade back. Hugh, I mean, listening to what Vuyo has alluded to and his views and what he's shared, I mean, what are your thoughts currently of maybe player entitlement or coaching dilemma when it comes to philosophy and culture clash with the current youngsters that are coming into the systems at the moment?
It's difficult. I've never been in the environment or the situation, so I can't speak from experience. What I have seen is a lot of coaches. Warren Gatland has spoken about it as well, and I've seen Toby Booth and Dwayne Peel at the Ospreys and the Scarlets have a conversation about the challenges in coaching these new younger players who like they said, think differently and behave differently to the players that they rub shoulders with when they were coming through. So I think it's a learning curve for the coaches. I don't think it's all a bad thing, because obviously back in the day you could scream and shout at players and speak to them in a very like they said, like the teacher-student way, or even beyond that, whereas you can't speak to people like that anymore. And I don't necessarily think that's definitely a bad thing. But I think it's just about learning and getting to understand what makes people tick. And if you are the person responsibility for a group of people, that's like your responsibility is to make them work, not necessarily for them to change so that you can make them work. I know that's something that Danny Cipriani has tweeted about a lot lately.
Yeah.
Now, I don't love everything about Danny Cipriani, but he did say that if you have a problem guy in your group who is not responding to you as a coach, is that definitely his problem, or is it potentially a bit on the coach? I don't know. So maybe I'll let Vuyo come in on that one. But yeah, it's just interesting, really. I enjoy hearing about it and learning about it, really.
Yes, Vuyo.
No, I just wanted to touch on I heard Hugh's comment. Then I thought, you know what? Actually, this is what people don't understand as well. When you are coaching international, when you're coaching a national team, you can have that. It's my way or the highway. You can have that mentality because remember, you've got players you're in abundance. Like you can pick any player, you can choose and get people who can fit into your system because you got the luxury. Whereas now, if you're coaching club rugby and you're making my way or the highway, then it becomes a little bit more difficult because now you are also limited to your budgets and you're also limited to the number of players who are out of contract. So, which is why, if you notice, that kind of mentality with the coaches of my way or the highway, they succeed in international rugby, but they don't necessarily succeed in club rugby because of those variants. But 100% with what you were saying, it's always an ongoing debate whether it's the coach or the player. I've always felt, for me, I've always had those situations where I was clashing with some players, and I'd rather let the player go and go move to somewhere else because it's just not possible. And once a player starts becoming toxic for your setup, then that becomes your problem as a coach. It becomes your issue because now the player is pulling the rest of the team down. Whereas you can sacrifice one player and then obviously keep a good set of mindset on your team, which is where your leadership group comes in. Which is where your leadership group are so important. Yeah. I always used to consult my leadership group. Do you guys want this player to go? Do you guys want this player to stay? And most of the time, I think 95% of the time, the leadership group have always said he must go.
Heavy. Kofi, I see you listening all the way from Cape Town, but we'll see if you can chime in and share your views as well, because you're also a coach down there. But gentlemen, sticking with South Africa for now, before we move on to the next topic about the whole URC and the comments that have been chimed by Lawrence Dallaglio, Sam Warburton, the Welshman. But nonetheless, looking at the current situation with the Sharks, the Sharks have basically hit rock bottom. And I'm not talking WWE here, but rock bottom. They've got coaching staff that has been there and done it before, except maybe a Powell who comes from a 7 setup, and except maybe a Dave Williams. But Dave Williams has been in the Sharks setup before, right? But the Sharks cannot seem to go over the line. Vuyo, the Sharks cannot seem to go over the line. What is your take on the current Sharks? They've got Springboks all over the show. They've got Springboks. But what is making them be this dismal at the moment?
Sure. As a tougher, okay, I'm going to put my opinion here. It's just my opinion. The biggest problem with what I see is that there's a disconnect between either the players, the leadership group, and the coaching staff. I feel there's somewhere along the line there's some disconnect, and the disconnect comes in a place where either people are not respecting their roles and they are overstepping in other people's roles, which is creating unhappiness, or the leadership group players went there for most of the season because of the World Cup and the preparation and all of that, and now they're coming back and jumping over straight into that leadership group, and now the players that were there before, because you always have to have a leadership group. So the players that were there before, I'm probably not happy with the fact that they've been kicked out of the leadership group, if I can say, because you can't have 13 leadership group members. So if Elizabeth comes back, he's going to take someone else's position, and that person is going to be obviously dropped. So there's sort of some disconnect within that, and also we can't forget that they have a new coach. What is the new coach's philosophy? What is the new coach's culture? So what culture is he bringing from New Zealand into that setup now? It's completely changed. He last coached the Sharks over 10 years ago, even more. So you can't really change. You can't really come in and obviously think that it was the same team that you had then. It's totally different. So for me, I think there's a lot of disconnect within the system. And until they sort out making sure that people's roles are staying a certain way, I think that trickled effect has influenced the team, and it's starting to become a non-confidence club.
Oof. The unconfident Sharks. Maybe that's what we should call them instead of Hollywood. Hollywood bets Sharks. Kofi, you're a coach, my man. And where does the accountability start? You've got Springboks in your setup. I listened to what Vuyo had to say about leadership group, but who takes responsibility now on the park? You've done all the work during the week. You're training 4 to 5 times a week. Saturday, who takes accountability for the Sharks? They were leading 18 points at halftime. Second half, 0 points. Who is responsible?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Hopefully you don't disappear like Jade.
Jade, and Bloemfontein's got its own problems, as you can see. I mean, you were here in Cape Town just now. You know what it's like. Yeah, it's good time. It's good time. Yeah, man. It's a big shit show there in Durban, to be quite honest. There's a lot of things that can be pointed at the situation, and I've always said that money.
Sorry, Kofi. Sorry, I need you to speak a bit louder. Yeah, it's a bit faint currently.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Good pitch.
I've always said that it's a bit of a shit show in Durban, since things have really been plastered over by money, and there's been a hell of a lot of money that has been invested over there. And I think more than anything, there isn't a sense of understanding as to, like Vuyo said, what everybody's role and responsibility is within that organization. I say organization just in terms of the guys that are playing on the field and the guys that are in the coaching staff. I can't speak for the support staff. I can't speak for all those other factors. But what we see, I mean, if you can break it down, really, you break it down to its nuts and bolts. The biggest issue that the Sharks are having is on attack. I think they've conceded the least tries out of the whole URC. And if you're conceding the least tries in the whole URC and you are lost on the log, that speaks a lot to the attacking mentality that isn't there. I think Vuyo brought it up that coach from New Zealand, very successful coach from New Zealand, coached the Sharks before John Plumtree. And he's down now after 10 years since he last coached the Sharks. And things are not the same. You know, I think there's, like Vuyo said, I think we hit a lot of nail on the head there. Especially with 13 Springboks who won the World Cup or who have played in a World Cup environment or who have been in that kind of environment, and they can't buy a win. And they can't buy a win because they're not buying into the philosophy of the coach. Now, I don't know many New Zealand coaches that opt for a kicking strategy, but you look at what's been successful at the Springboks in terms of winning World Cups and rugby championships, etc. And that's been a predominantly, effective kicking game, which is there to pressurize the opposition on defense and create a lot of mistakes where the teams can counter upon. Now, when you take somebody out of a system like that and you put them in a system where you say, listen, let's run the ball. Once you start running the ball and things don't come off, it's human nature. You start second guessing yourself. You start doubting yourself, your abilities, whether you can actually play the game of rugby anymore. Doesn't matter how many World Cups you can win. Doubt is always something that can creep in. And I think it's something where these guys need to communicate and get to the nuts and bolts of what they're trying to do again and kind of reestablish those principles that they're trying to emphasize. There's guys that have been there 8-9 years that we've seen very little to no improvement, and they continue to stick with them, And it's quite sad, to be quite honest, from maybe as a player's perspective. Once upon a time, then you are a coach now, and you look at a player, and I think a player should be, especially in their early 20s into their mid 20s and into their prime, which would be your 26 to 29, 30. You don't see much improvement, and I can name players where I haven't seen like much improvement from him. It's quite sad, and it's actually
name the players. Don't be shy.
Hey, come on now. Without naming the players, I just think it's a situation where from Monday to Friday, Monday to Saturday, whatever the case might be, you wonder what the fuck these guys are doing. Excuse my language. You wonder what these guys are doing on the training field. You wonder what these guys are taught, to look out for in the game. If you look at the guys that are playing at the Lions, there's no chance that those guys are better than. You look at the guys that are playing at Benetton, there's no chance. The guys at Zebra, there's no chance. These guys they've lost all these games, bro. All of these games. And there's no ways you can tell me that these guys are better than the guys that are playing at the Sharks. But all the
On
points
paper.
that Vuyo, on paper, of course, but rugby is not played on paper. But all the points that Vuyo raised about, the coaching, the structure, the identity. I think there's a massive identity crisis. They don't know what game they need to play. And once there's an identity crisis, regardless of the roles and responsibilities that you have for even Springbok leaders, you're not going to get much change out of them. So it's quite a sad thing because I'm a person who grew up a Shark supporter, especially in the mid and late 90s. I don't think the Sharks were massively successful, but they were entertaining. I'm not seeing entertainment at the moment, and that's another sad thing. We watch the game, we criticize the game, simply because we want to be entertained by what's in front of us. And the rugby that's being played at the moment isn't entertaining. And I think, once again, what Vuyo said with regards to, you look at the player profile that you have and then the design that you want to put together as a result of that player profile, combined with the skills that the coaches have in order to affect those things and implement those things and impart those things, I should rather say, that the players can implement them on the field. I'm not seeing those things happening, And if you look at a guy like, I've got massive respect for Warren Whiteley. And Warren used to, he captained the Boks, captained the Lions, etc. Grew up in KZN. If we get to the nuts and bolts of it and Warren is telling Eben something, I don't know how much feedback and dialogue there might be there in that scenario, for example. So, I've got, there's plenty to say about this. But I think there's a lot of soul searching that needs to happen. I think they need to cut the budget. I think the budget is far too high. It feels like a retirement village there, and if they can do that and just give a little bit more hunger to the guys that are there, I think things can change pretty quickly.
Sure. Vuyo, you also want to tap into this retirement village by Kofi? Share your thoughts.
Not the retirement village on my side, bro. I can't be mentioning those kind of words, bro. But anyway, no. I just want to touch on what Kofi said about the identity of their game. If you notice, the first half, when they were putting pressure on the Lions, they had 3 quick lineouts. And that says that this is a team that wants to attack. This is a team that wants to obviously run with the ball from the back and make it quick game. But then you ask yourself, okay, cool, this is now working. They putting pressure on the Lions, which is why the dominant first half with the territory, because even Lukanya was kicking those chip kicks, even Fassi was kicking those chip kicks, just put them in the 22. And then you look at the next instance, they're on the 10 meter and they're hitting up and under. And that's why, like Kofi, you spot on. There's definitely an identity crisis in terms of what structure to play. They don't know whether to play kicking game. They don't know whether to play running game. Whereas if you look at the Stormers, I always laugh with my mates about the Stormers. And the Stormers are successful. But we call their rugby a vur rugby, like you offloading everywhere. You're just throwing the ball. You don't even know who's there. You're just throwing the ball. Yes, that's their identity. And it's working for them. It might not be perfect. You might get to teams where they're stopping them. They're stopping those offloads. So, but do they stop those offloads? They don't stop. They continue because that's their identity. And that's what is happening at the moment. The way I actually support Kofi on that, there's like an identity crisis. They don't know whether to run the ball. They don't know whether to kick. They don't know whether to actually speed up the game or to slow the game down. And those are the tricky parts. And then obviously we talk about at what confidence they knock in terms of those penalties yesterday, in terms of they haven't been dominant in the scrums. This is like a team that's been dominant in set pieces, but not anymore.
They've got 2 Springboks in the front row.
But their molds were not going anywhere. Their scrums, they were getting pinned in the scrums. So we don't know what is going on. So it's a little bit of a issue in terms of that identity, like Kofi has said. 100% Kofi.
All right, both you and Kofi.
So before you go,
okay.
Sorry, Scoop. The Sharks are actually very bad, bro. Very, very bad. If you look at how the Lions scored in the first half, it was off I mean, how the Sharks scored in the first half. It was off the Lions' mistake. I think the Lions kicked the ball dead twice, or straight into touch twice, right? And then 3 phases after the line out, the Sharks scored. There was a try that the scrum half court, Grant Williams scored. He saw a little bit of a gap down the line, and he went there and he scored. And then the other 3-pointer was scored off Kerwin Bosch's drop goal. That's 10 points that they actually scored on the back of the Lions' mistake, not on the back of, they've had the ball, they've created pressure through continuity or whatever the case
Building a
might
foundation.
be. Exactly. So if you actually minus those 10 points, if you cut down the mistakes that the Lions made, the Lions got a very young team, so you expect them to make mistakes. But if you cut down those mistakes, you minus 10 points, and you add that 10 or whatever the case might be to what, that's a proper reflection of what the scoreline looks like. And then it's not actually as good as what it was even yesterday. It's even worse. It paints a worse off picture. So for me, it's like the reality is that the Sharks are actually much worse than what we think they are. Springboks are not. And I think the Springboks is just papering over the cracks there. The money is papering over the cracks. There's like, I think a lot of things that need to be ironed out, removed, brought back, whatnot. And if you actually look at it, it's actually quite saddening because this is a team that has got guys like Joey Mongalo that are there, that have got Super Rugby experience at the Lions, etc. They've done a wealth of coaching in Pretoria also. They've got these guys in and around their system. They've got a lot of guys in and around the system. But I do think, like, too many Chiefs, not enough Indians. They need to set aside a culture, set aside an identity. This is how we're going to play. We might lose. If we do lose, fuck it, it's fine. We continue. But this thing of sometimes you kick, sometimes you run, sometimes it's just messing up, I think, a very flavorful team. It's actually making them extremely bland. Sorry, man.
Okay, I hear you. I don't think that too many Chiefs and not enough Indians is appropriate in 2024, but we'll have to tap into that. Sorry for whispering. Gentlemen, Vuyo and Kofi, you both mentioned the kicking element. Remembering last season, the Sharks actually had Pure Nomlomo as the kicking attack coach. And it worked quite well from the games that I saw. I mean, their kicking attack was amazing. Saw them against, I think it was Toulouse, even though they ended up losing the game. That worked well. I saw them in one of the UK sides again as well, the kicking game, and they were playing away. I think it must have been Edinburgh or something. I'm not sure. But the kicking attack game was working very well in terms of knowing when to kick, how to kick, and actually the responsibility of players. Once the ball has been kicked, you need players to run after that ball and make it a contestable kick. You can't just kick Vurvai kicking and hope for the best. I mean, at this current point, bar yesterday's game, the kicking game of the Sharks has been woeful, to be honest. The kicking game of the Sharks has been all over the place. I've seen Kern Bosch kick so many balls where I go, who is chasing after this ball? Who is running after this ball to put teams under pressure? You know? And we're talking about the highest level of rugby here. Highest level of rugby. URC, I don't know how high level URC is, but it's supposedly highest level of rugby, right? And these people get big bucks, as Kofi has said. Who is the current kicking coach at the Sharks? I have no idea. But Jade, you might know one or two things. I might not share your views on this current saga happening in KZN.
I'm very far from KZN, brother. I'm very far from KZN. They came down to Bloemfontein a few weeks ago, and the Cheetahs even, beat them. So I don't know what's going on at the Sharks. I don't know if maybe in Europe we get this a lot, where we say, does the coach have the dressing room? Are these players playing for plum? I'm not sure. I also believe that the Sharks is basically, was it the issue of square pegs in round holes, or what is round holes in square, and one round pegs in square holes, whatever the saying is. But I still think that somebody said now too many chefs, too many chefs in this kitchen. I still can't believe that he hasn't been brave enough and brought in a guy like John Smith that's fly off, maybe. Yeah, tried him, or the boogeyman, I see Werner Kok starting every week, nothing against him, but maybe it's time to bring in the boogeyman and give him a go on the wing or at center. Try something. Nothing's been working for you. A guy like Pepsi Buthelezi yesterday made 8 meters in the game, in a close fought South African derby. He made 8 meters the whole game. So what's going on with him? I know myself and you sat and spoke yesterday. Maybe it's time for him to move on. I don't know the signings they made. Did they improve this team? It doesn't seem like it. I don't know how the coaching staff is. I know Joey was there. I'm not sure if Joey's still there, but everybody's saying the Sharks just need a win, and to click and to get the ball rolling. But that win seems so far away. When's it going to come? Against the Stormers last week, they showed moments of brilliance. I think it was the Fussy or the Cock try. They scored from set piece. They looked decent. But then again, against the Lions, they took 3 or 4 steps back again. So wait now for the Sharks. I really don't know. I don't know. For me, personally, I don't think Plumtree is the man. I think Plumtree is outdated. I think he's like I said yesterday, I posted a picture of a Sony Ericsson Walkman. I think that is Plumtree's coaching now at the moment. I think he's past it. I think there's better coaches in South Africa that can take this group forward. You can just look at the Lions, what their coaching group was doing there, what the players they have at their disposal. So, yeah, there's a lot of problems there. And sorry to say this, I know Scoop, I might get backlash for this, but it's another big team, iconic team, sporting team, bought by Americans, and they went backwards after its ownership. So, yeah.
Stop talking about Chelsea, bro.
Wow, thanks, Jade. Hugh, you've been awfully quiet. Obviously, I know you are taking notes of everything that has been said. But going back to my comment, but going back into the Sharks coaching staff, I mean, we've heard a lot of players previously and some people that have worked with certain people in that coaching staff, that certain coaches, I mean, are quite robotic in their approach. I mean, things don't work in current situations where players need to have a bit of freedom. Players need to be able to make decisions on the field instead of things being robotic and too structured for players to step out of that structure. It becomes an impossible task, I mean, you've got someone who comes from a sevens background who will come into a training setup and just prepare shields in terms of their training or their coaching philosophy or their coaching patterns. I mean, there's a lot of things that are not gelling from the coaching staff and to the Rock Nations element or people that have pumped in the money. Maybe, like Kofi has said, like Jade has said, maybe there's too many chiefs in this current situation. I mean, there's not enough people that are willing to take a step back and listen to what has been structured in terms of how do we set up a good foundation, how do we set up a good platform in order for us to move forward. But sticking with moving forward, there's been a lot of utterances from the UK, from the likes of Sam Warburton, Lawrence Dallaglio, regarding URC currently. Hugh, I want you to step in here as well as a Welshman living in England. You are privy to such information and obviously said, I'm not sitting at the bars and listening to people that are talking about rugby, but actual man with the stats, with the numbers, who understands what's currently happening. And obviously we've got a few South Africans listening to the conversation as well. I mean, what is your take regarding URC? I mean, there seems to be a narrative within the UK pundits about maybe having to remove South African teams from the URC. I mean, from your perspective, how much of an influence have South African teams have had in this particular competition? And would you like to see them stay longer within this competition itself? Or would it be best for European teams not to have South African teams in the current URC setup?
Well, I think if the South African teams left, then the European teams would win more. I can say that. Listen, I'm unusual. Okay, so I'm a Welsh rugby fan, but I like the URC. Now that does make me a very small minority. The vast majority of Welsh fans would rather the Welsh teams played in the English Premiership because they feel that those fixtures would have more meaning to them. And the thing with things having meaning to people is if people believe that it has meaning, then it does. And so I can't tell people that they are wrong to think that because it's their own personal views and they're quite entitled to them. I will say that I would not take much heed in anything that Lawrence Dallaglio puts out there. I would say that he is a very typical member of the 2003 gang who show themselves to have an out-of-touchness with modern rugby every time they choose to pick up a microphone and tell us about it. The Sam Warburton one was a bit disappointing from my point of view. So yes, you are. I am pro URC, and I'm probably more pro URC outwardly than maybe sometimes I truly am, because it gets such a hard time from my peers, and I feel the need to stand up for it. So Sam Warburton's article was interesting. The first thing I would say is that Sam Warburton is paid by TNT to cover the English Premiership. So there is perhaps a particular conflict of interests there. He is a board member at Cardiff Rugby. If I was another board member at Cardiff Rugby, I would find it a little bit irksome for a board member to say that 9 of our 11 home games in a season they don't care about. I would say, dude, could you at least, put on a brave face publicly and try and sell some tickets over here? But yeah, so I think Sam Warburton's committed the eternal crime of assuming that Wales's problems are everybody's problems. And I think that Wales are the odd ones out in the URC because I think the Irish, the Scottish, the Italians and the South Africans are loving it. So plug. I put out a video on the Pirate Rugby recently that talks about the impact that the South African teams have had, and it's almost an entirely positive one. The travel and the ecological impacts of that travel are an obvious negative, but it's not any particularly worse than Super Rugby, I would say, but it's still a negative. So I put that video out there, and the responses that I've been getting from South Africans is, we love the URC, it's great. Some people prefer it to Super Rugby, some people don't, and that's fine. The Irish obviously love the URC. The Scottish are really getting on with it now, and we can see that Benetton and Benetton fans in particularly are really getting on board with it as well. Now, Benetton's capacity at their stadium is only 5,000, so it's very small, but they are selling it out most weeks in the URC. So they're looking to expand that now, which is great to see. So, yeah, I think Wales are probably the odd ones out in the URC at the moment. Like I say, I can't tell that Welsh fans are there wrong because it's their truth, and that's fine. But I would say that from my point of view, the difference in the URC from a commercial viability level and a star power level and a quality of rugby level, the addition of the South Africans has transformed the league for the better, in my opinion. So I would not like to see the South Africans leaving the competition anytime soon. And I dare say that the majority of fans in the URC would agree, with the exception of a lot of Welsh fans. And like I said, the Welsh fans have their own reasons for that, and that's okay.
Fair enough. Hugh, sticking with you, Frontier Pioneer has a question for you. He wanted to know how does the URC round attendance record compare with Premiership and Top 14 or D2? I don't know if you've done any research on that yet.
It's funny you should mention that, because I've dropped a long read article on the Substack for Pirate Rugby just today on just such a thing. So if you go on my Twitter account, you'll see a long read article on there. But to sum it up, the Top 14 is the best attended league. Last season, no team in the Top 14 averaged fewer than 10,000 fans per home game, which is excellent. The Pro D2 has a lot of variation. So the top team, Von, get 8,500, which is very good. Very good. But some of the bottom teams get less than 2,000, as you might expect once you're getting down to some of the lower reaches of the second division. Premiership, Leicester Tigers by far and away the biggest. It depends. If you take into account some of the big games that they hold at Twickenham and things, they really inflate the numbers. So last season, Harlequins and Saracens' average attendance was actually higher than the capacity of their home stadiums because they played games at Twickenham that were 5 times greater attended than any other game they played that season. So it depends how you measure it. And then in the URC, again, the Stormers and the Sharks are actually the 2 best attended teams. It looks like the Bulls are going quite well there, and Leinster are also very well attended. Again, whether you consider games that they play at the Aviva or not impacts how many fans Leinster get on average. And Munster are getting great attendances at the moment as well.
Excellent work there, Hugh. Kofi, do you want to stay in the URC or you guys want to go back to the Southern Hemisphere? What are your thoughts?
When you grow up a Super Rugby lover, and you know that your Friday, effectively 9:30, 11:30, and then your whole Saturday, from 7:30 up until 9:30, is just jam-packed with rugby. It's very difficult not to want to go back to something like that. But obviously, I'm an adult now, so I don't know if it would be feasible for me to be as glued to the TV screen as I was when I was a kid, watching all of that rugby. I do think the time differences at this point in terms of what supporters of rugby are looking for lean more towards the URC. I think the rugby standard isn't the same. I think it's slightly lower, but I might be biased in terms of the rugby that I like to watch, in terms of the entertainment that I like to source from watching rugby games. But in terms of the time reference, I think the URC is obviously perfect in terms of us being able to watch at a time that is, maybe an hour separation or 2 hour separation in winter, whatever the case might be. So yeah, there's a few pros and cons to it. From a commercial viability standpoint, I think obviously the pound and the euro play a massive role for the South African teams, and I think they gain more from it. I think the 2 teams in the Champions Cup now, I think it's the Stormers and the Bulls, will obviously gain quite a significant amount from that, which is good for their recruitment and hopefully the styles of rugby that they employ. So I'm on the fence about it, but I think I'm more on the fence leaning towards URC. I think it's quite invigorating to see like on the 30th of December, which we've never really had before, DHL Stadium having 40,000 people watching the rugby. On the 23rd of December, 37,000 people watching the rugby, in a derby, which, we've had derbies before here, but if we're being honest, before these 2 World Cups that we've just won, South Africa, I think there was a bigger decline in, the rugby watching public. And I think, rugby's taken more of a front seat now, in terms of, the winning culture that has enveloped the country. And I think that's obviously fantastic for those of us who are involved with rugby. And I still need to see when the Dragons or Saracens or whoever comes down, La Rochelle, I would still like to see, upwards of 25,000 people watching that rugby, and not just for the derbies alone. So I think a lot of work needs to go towards marketing the product a lot more. I think a lot of work needs to go out towards finding different spaces. And I really love the way that Western Province have gone about using the Donny Craven Stadium bring people in Stellenbosch a little bit closer. When the SA Under 20, or not SA Under 20, the Under 20 Championship was being played, the Youth Athlone Stadium. So it's really nice to see different facilities being used, which brings people closer to the game, closer to the stars of the game. But I think it's very important that that happens in Pretoria. I think it's very important that that happens in Durban, etc., from a South African standpoint, because I don't think rugby can live at this point just being in the big stadiums. I think the smaller stadiums have got a big role to play, and just basically the marketing and the business behind rugby and why people need to go to the stadium. I think this is the right time to kind of make that elevate at this point in time, because people really like the game at this point in time. People
Yeah.
are really enjoying the price. Especially, I'll speak mostly for you what I'm seeing here in Cape Town. Tickets are selling out more often than not. A lot of people are enjoying going to the stadium. I think it helps that the World Rugby Sevens was here at the same time. URC is also here. So there's good usage of the stadium. And there's also good quality in terms of the product that we are watching. I think if there's a higher focus on the product, with winning being something that becomes a byproduct of it in terms of the culture, etc., I think you then find people looking at a Saturday out at the rugby as something a lot more viable than just watching it on TV. So I think the URC is literally, at that point now in its second year, at that point where if the product becomes a lot better, if you're watching it on TV, the engagements on TV become a lot more Premier League-esque, not in terms of sensationalism, but in terms of, teaching the people that are watching about who these people from Wales are, who these people from Ireland are, who these people from. We get to get a better sense of, the community that rugby is putting people together, which I think is something that they need to kind of grind a little bit more out of the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fair enough. Hugh, you want to jump in there? And then after Hugh, Jade, you can share your thoughts as well. And then Vuyo will close it off on this particular subject.
Yeah, I just wanted to completely agree with Kofi on the marketing thing. I think that's something that the URC has struggled with in the past. If you compare to what TNT are doing for the English Premiership, I think the URC are less good at marketing and getting the league in front of eyes and extolling the virtues of the league, talking about the absolute superstars that we have playing in the league. I don't think we market them as well as we could. So I completely agree that that is something that the URC needs to get better at.
Yeah, Jade?
Hey, Bloemfontein, eh?
Bloemfontein. What is happening in Bloemfontein? Load shedding. Vuyo, you can jump in.
Yes, we're no. I just read when Hugh was talking earlier, I was thinking we never had such complaints when the Kings and the Cheetahs were in the Pro 14, because obviously the teams were beating them every time they came overseas. No one was complaining.
Oh, Vuyo, I think you're getting a bit close to the truth here. I think you're a bit close to the bone, my friend.
Because now the big four are coming in, and obviously now they're starting to put everyone under pressure and start to winning at home and start to win away. So it has become more like teams are not winning anymore. So for me, it's always like I think it's just I don't know. I don't even know how to call it. It's just a lot of people just blabbering things out without even thinking. I think for South African teams, I think for me, South African teams is actually brilliant that we're playing in the URC, because it has given us an opportunity to play against English teams. It has given us an opportunity to play against French teams. I think because of that, we've sort of gotten a more rounded game. Our players are starting to pick up a more rounded game. The French facing the French type style, facing the European type style. I think that has given us such a lot more rounded, Whereas in New Zealand, in Super Rugby, we're faced with a lot of one-sided. I wouldn't even count some. I mean, if you look at Australia every year they probably had one good team. Whereas in New Zealand, we're obviously putting us under the pump in terms of how their style of play was. Whereas now we're facing quite a lot of different types of game. On to touch what Kofi said in terms of marketing and everything, I think a lot of South Africans are still confused because there's a lot of games within. We're playing 3 tournaments. I think we're playing basically URC, Heineken Cup, and then the Champions Cup, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's a lot of people don't know which is which and where is where, who's playing what. So I think there's still a lot of confusion, and I've seen some advertisements on SuperSport about obviously the different cups or different types of cups, but that's not enough because a lot of people don't have DSTV in terms of watching that. So it should be almost like in those. I don't know if you guys remember, we used to have those programs, the game programs on games when you go to stadiums. I think those kind of tournaments should be explained exactly on those game things, so that you can on this game program, so that you can at least understand what makes you play a certain tournament, what makes you play a different tournament, so that they can actually round it up. But it's a lot of it. I mean, the guys are spot on. A lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of South Africans don't know what is the games, and also the marketing side of things is a little bit more tricky.
Yeah, fair enough. I see, Jade, the electricity is back in Bloemfontein.
Now, Vuyo set it up perfectly there, where he said that, as you know, it's something new for South Africans. We're still getting used to all of these different competitions. However, you know, there's a big difference as well. When you were in Super, you knew who the flower of the Reds was, you knew who the flower of the Force or the Brumbies were. But for now, you know, you still need to read in, you know, who's the Konach number 10 or who's the Scarlets number 10 if you don't follow the game week in, week out. But they're getting there. I think also in terms of logistics error or issue for South Africa, I think it's something that helped Rassie a lot, because post 2015 or pre 2015, we had a big exodus of players in South Africa going into Europe and playing in the Pro 14 or whatever it was called then, and in the Heineken Cup back then. But now you're having those South Africans are playing in the same competition as fellow South Africans. Paul, a few guys earning their bucks in Japan. So I think that helps South Africa as well in their preparation for the Boks. You know, it's these guys, they're keeping a close eye on the Jasper Wiesers and the Pollards overseas. You know, they are now and then they're playing against South Africans as well, where you actually have that battle of the number 10s, or we have that physical battle against South Africans, where previously you had South Africans playing in Super, and then you had so much players playing in European competitions, where it's actually difficult for us all to keep an eye on all of our guys. But right now, I think it's working out for South Africa at the moment. Yeah.
All right, fair enough, gentlemen. We've just got 2 more topics to touch on, but we're not going to dwell too much on that. Hugh, I'm going to jump straight into you. We want to touch on the English Premiership. We heard that Owen Farrell might be jumping ship from Saracens and moving to Racing 92. I mean, obviously coming at the back of him retiring, or not retiring, taking a sabbatical from international rugby, meaning that England won't have a captain. They need to find a new captain. And another element of this is that England still has that overseas eligibility law or rule currently. And do you think, first of all, they are prone to change that eligibility law regarding, I mean, we saw one of the other players as well. I think it's Orendal, if I'm not mistaken, a young player who's just recently who's also signed with a French club. And now, obviously, he can't represent his country in Six Nations. So, I mean, do you think England should change their eligibility law? I mean, France is literally a stone throw away from England. Your thoughts on this current situation?
We have a different view of that sort of thing here. You know, in England, 20 minutes down the road is far away. People don't want to go that far. So I think everybody just wants to go and be in the same team as Sia Khaleesi, honestly. I think that's all it is. It remains to be seen. The English Premiership is increasing its salary cap next year. And I think we'll see if the tide of clubs leaving, of players leaving continues. Of course, 3 clubs have gone bust. Well, 4 if you count Jersey, who were the Championship champions. So if another club goes, then it will become very difficult to keep this rule in place. Now, what the RFU are doing now is they're talking about bringing in these hybrid contracts, which are similar to the central contracts that Wales had, where the salary of the player is partially funded by the union and partially by the club, and that would keep players in England. So it remains to be seen. So we need to see what happens next season and if these contracts come in before we talk about changing that law. It seems that they're taking steps to try and make it so they don't have to change that law. So, yeah, I think I can't see them changing it anytime soon. If another club goes bust, then I think all bets are off when it comes to the Premiership, and anything could happen.
Yeah, fair enough. Jade, I mean, looking at Owen Farrell linked to Racing 92, looking at who's coaching Racing 92, former English coach Stuart Lancaster back in 2015, knocked out in the quarterfinals by the one and only Welsh side, isn't it? I think. But I mean, what are your thoughts in Owen Farrell linking up with Stuart Lancaster at Racing 92, who are doing very well in French top 14, number 1 in the log? They seem to be on the right track. Vuyo earlier mentioned that there's been a good culture that's been set up by Lancaster at Racing 92. I mean, your thoughts regarding these two players or figures regarding this?
Well, I just feel that, Owen Farrell gets so much, criticism for his tackle technique and for the personality is, etc., that we undermine and we forget that he's actually a world-class rugby player. And if he's going to get a big paycheck, he deserves it. And also the pressure that has come out of after this World Cup, where, he's publicly taken a sabbatical from England, and he came out publicly stating a few mental health issues as well. I think give the guy his flowers, let him move on, let him move to another country, where there's less pressure, where he can go and enjoy the game and find himself. After the World Cup, there was big talk that he would move away from Union completely and play rugby league. We wouldn't want Owen Farrell completely lost to rugby union like we have now with Mark Noan Tawasi, in Australia. So I feel that he deserves this paycheck. He deserves his break at Racing. Let him go. Let him go and earn some big bucks. Let him take some time away from England, and let them have somebody else that they can blame and abuse online, etc.
All right, Vuyo.
Yeah, no, I don't have much on it, but for me, there was a time when, like Owen Farrell was just holding Saracens together. I think whenever he was on the field, Saracens were doing quite well, and whenever he was never playing, and then Saracens were in trouble. So I think, in terms of leadership, I think he's definitely got what it takes, and for him to join like a team like Racing, it goes to show that the coach. Lancaster is actually trying to build up his leadership group so that he can have strong characters. He's already have a couple, so I think if I was probably in a position to advise Owen Farrell, I would probably go as far as, even if I was his coach, I would probably go as far as, go. Maybe you might even actually revive your rugby career in terms of just getting back into the English team and not having that negativity around you. So I think it would be good for him, definitely, and especially with someone like Lancaster running the setup there, being in charge. He's also learned quite a lot since 2015. So I think it will definitely help Owen Farrell's career.
Fantastic. Kofi, final thoughts? Oh, I think load shedding in Cape Town has also...
0. Guys must make their money, man. I just think that things like salary caps and having to have players play in the country in order for them to be eligible for them to play for their national teams is slightly outdated. I understand that, fans want to watch their superstars, but I think, it's important that countries work hard to create the next superstars that want to stay and remain and play. And then when it's their time to go, they go. But I think it's important that, if somebody thinks they're worth a certain level of of money in terms of value, and they can find that money elsewhere. And teams can pay for that lifestyle that they're looking for. They must go for it. I don't think people should be held back from that. And if they still play at a level that's good enough for them to perform for their national team, it's going to benefit their national team, then they should. I think it's very outdated to say, and I used to be that person. I used to be that person to say, no, players must play within the borders of their country so that the supporters can want to go watch your Siya Kolisi or whatever the case might be. Man, South Africa had 12, 13 years of Siya Kolisi effectively, so there's nothing wrong. There's nothing that should stop him from going to play at Racing or Owen Farrell. It can be a worry where your younger guys are being taken, but I think once again, it's very much important for the teams and the systems that create these players and create these pathways for players to be able to produce them. And this is what I talk about the rugby being from a marketability standpoint. They need to work hard in order for them to be marketable. If Damian Willemse, who is now one of two South African global Adidas ambassadors from a rugby standpoint, and he decides to leave the Stormers need to work hard to make Sasha Ngomezulu or whoever the next person might be, the next superstar that people want to go and watch and support, and see. So I don't think individual players should be limited in that regard. And rugby should work hard at creating superstars, if you will.
Fair enough. Hugh?
Yeah, very quickly. The English salary cap has a marquee player clause, so you can have one player whose salary is not captured under it. So if I may be the conspiracy theorist, which I do like to be sometimes, I think if Owen Farrell wanted to stay, they could find a way between Saracens and the RFU to pay him whatever he liked. So I think there must be at least a part of him that wants to leave.
Oh, no, you must go to Racing. Vuyo?
No, I just wanted to share something that I just thought of. If you remember, Dylan Lates played obviously the Springboks. I think it was 2016 and 2017. I'm not quite sure, but I think that's when he represented the Springboks from the Stormers Western Province era. Then he moved to La Rochelle. I bet you now he'd be more comfortable in the Springbok jersey now than he was back then, just because of that experience.
Oh, what a way to close our first show for 2024. I would like to thank my panel, Vuyo Jade, currently coaching in Russia, Hugh, the stats man, Kofi, the coach man with Under the Table Mountain, Jade, all the way from Bloemfontein where they struggle with electricity, but he is the stats man, the analyst, the man who knows what is required to be the best prop in the world. All right. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll be back next week, Sunday, talking all things rugby. And thank you for joining us and have a wonderful Sunday. Enjoy the chicken.
Thanks, guys. Merry Christmas in Russia to you, Vuyo.
Cheers, man.